Delirious gave it for the Willow Creek churches, for the Baptist churches, for the larger mainline churches that weren't like white flag dancing, falling on chairs, Toronto blessing, charismatic churches where kind of anything went already anyways. They put it into like a package that was consumable.
This is Rock That Doesn't Roll, the story of Christian music. I'm Andrew Gill, a music journalist who grew up listening to Christian rock.
And I'm Leah Payne, author of God Gave Rock and Roll to You, A History of Contemporary Christian Music.
Now, Leah, a couple episodes ago, listeners might remember that you came in with a surprise topic for us that just lit our listeners and the discussion on fire. And that topic was something you came across from some guy on Instagram.
Some guy. Yeah. Yes.
And so listeners already know what we're talking about, but we'll just reveal it as we go. But we did find some guy, and it turns out he's not just some guy.
Yeah. Longtime supporter of our podcast and one-time guest, Chris Hauser, who knows everyone and anyone within and around the Christian music industry. He was the first person of 4 people who sent me an Instagram reel. And I have to say, full disclosure, I wasn't sure how people would respond when I brought it into the chat. And so I make a practice of not identifying someone by name unless they I don't know. It seems like etiquette. Maybe I didn't follow the etiquette very well, but I wasn't sure. And it's a video making an academics love like an arguable thesis. So this was like catnip for me personally, which was, is Delirious more influential than Nirvana? And the video argued, yes, Delirious is more influential. And so I had to bring it to our shared group of wisdom. There were 4 of us at the time. And you did the excellent work of tracking down said arguer, and I'm super excited about it.
It's actually Gabe Wilson.
Yeah. Some guy.
Yeah.
I'm some guy.
All right, so since we've got Gabe Wilson here, and he's not just some guy,
not
let's
at all.
talk about who you are first, and then we'll get into your detailed argument about this lasting influence. So why don't you tell us how you would like people to know you, and then we can get into some of your own body of work.
Yeah, so I grew up a kid in Christian circles and found myself in the 90s on a worship team and also in a ton of scene bands around the Portland, Oregon area. So like my bands were bands that were primarily made up of Christians, but we weren't Christian bands at all. Or at least like not going for the Christian music industry at first. Mm-hmm. We were playing with the Dandy Warhols and with the Brian Jonestown Massacre and with, bands that were in that Portland underground scene. And it was cool. I was also serving on the worship team as well at our local church. And our local church in the 90s had a lot of musicians, just being from the Northwest and everything. It was kind of a smaller church, but it had members that used to be in Napalm Beach and the Untouchables and like all these like Portland punk bands. So I kind of grew up like loving that scene a lot.
Yeah. What was that? There was a venue in Portland in that era, right? That had sort of like Christian and secular stuff performed.
Yeah. So a few of them. There was the Meow Meow that was run by Todd Fatal. Yes. There was the Push run by Mikey Bridges. There was Tom Festival.
The Push once back in the day. Yeah.
Our bands. Yeah. And Tom Festival was super cool too. That was around the Tooth and Nail explosion, all that stuff. Yeah. That was more late 90s. Around the late 90s, I kind of, this is maybe a very, very, a very God, encounter type of experience, but I just kind of had this thing where I was in conflict with myself. I was spending a lot of time trying to be a Christian that would move people towards God. That was kind of my goal. Was like I'm gonna be like a Bono, who I still very sincerely respect. A Christian in the general market space that will do my best to move people towards God. And then, I came to an epiphany and I wondered if it would be more effective if I could move God towards people. And so I stopped aiming my art towards a crowd and I really started aiming my art towards a very mystical target, which is the heart of the Lord. How do you move the Lord's heart with music? How do you, if I lift up if I be lifted up, then I will draw all men unto me. And what does that mean in music? Can you move God's heart through delay? Can you move it through distortion? Can you move it through record production? Can you move it through, various art forms? I just kind of became really infatuated with all that and fascinated by it. And thus, I gave up all general market music pursuits and decided just to lead worship in my church. Prior to that, if I had a really cool song idea, I would basically try to give that to my scene band because, that was for cool music. And if I had like a really cheesy vanilla chorus, I'd be like, all right, I'll make a worship song out of this because, Christians love terrible music and this is kind of terrible. That was like my thought process. It's mean and condescending, but that was just like young me, And then at some point I just decided to take all the ideas I could and invest in raising the creative lid in my local church. And that became all that I wanted to do anymore. Worked as an electrician, swinging a hammer, slinging rope through houses and wiring houses up and stuff. And then around that time, that's when TomFest started and all of those things. So that kind of gets you from like 1992, 93, 91, when I was a huge scene kid, Nirvana fan, 95, Dandy Warhols, and around 97, 98, 99, just kind of making that pivot to just doing nothing but like the weirdest possible worship music I could create was kind of my idea. And fortunately, I had a pastor that was cool with it. And so we began to experiment a ton, and it was a really wild time. And that worship team became known as the Rock and Roll Worship Circus, which was basically, we turned into a CCM band somewhere along the way. I don't really know how it happened. It was like super accident. We toured with Delirious. We did a lot of really cool stuff in Europe. That band evolved from worship team members into like more of a steady band that became The Listening, and The Listening went until probably 2010, 2011. So that was like a decade of my life in worship bands or experimental arty Christian rock stuff, right? Mm-hmm. In the meantime, that doesn't really make a living at all. What I did for a trade at that point was just producing records. And so I got to produce really cool records like the Violet Burning's Drop Dead. Was one of my favorites that I got to do at that time. Some stuff for Telecast, Sherry Youngward, just different, different kind of underground Christian stuff, really.
Yeah.
And nothing that really broke big. And then
the Violet Burning is one of those stalwart names that you reckon anyone who's been into underground Christian music knows that name. Yeah.
Michael Pritzl is a huge hero of mine. I love his work. He was the first guy that ever married the intensity of rock and roll to the atmosphere of worship. And really, I should do a commentary reel like I did on Delirious on the Violets because, dude, the Violets were so good. And to this day, Michael's still making really challenging art and saying challenging things. I love him. So, yeah, that all led me to, live in various places, Portland, Oregon, Nashville. The Listening was in Nashville for a little while. And then I moved out to Northern California in around 2010. 2009, right in there. And around that time was sort of the arc of Bethel music kind of becoming a thing. And I was just, honestly, right place, right time. I loved the church. I loved the worship stuff they were creating. And a lot of us guys from The Listening actually kind of ended up in that swirl. So I ended up producing Tides and You Make Me Brave. And Chris Greeley, who is The Listening's guitar player, Worship Circus guitar player, ended up their main mix guy and mixed those records, or at least some of Tides and all of You Make Me Brave. And it's just really interesting how all of the swirl of what we were doing with the Worship Circus, The Listening, trying to push the envelope in worship. It's like we got to apply some of that stuff as Bethel music began its rise, And so those were the first really big records I did. And at the time, Bethel was indie. Not a lot of people understand that.
Right.
Tides was an indie record. You Make Me Brave was an indie record. And those both hit number one in the Christian Billboard charts. Both hit the top 40 Billboard general albums chart. I mean, it's crazy the success they had, kind of out of nowhere, seemingly.
Yeah, I was scrolling through like the albums you've produced, and I was like, wow, it's like independent, and then like one label and then another label. But I was wondering about that, if that was just sort of the state of the music industry these days, that people can put things out independently, or if what was up with that. So it was just that it was kind of off the radar and became big, or?
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, my pedigree before that wasn't to the level of the guys that, produced a lot of the Bethel stuff after that. So, Jason Ingram, Ed Cash, those guys did records past, the ones that I did. But the records that I was able to produce, man, it's such a blessing. Again, right place, right time, however you want to say it. Like, it was just awesome to get to work with those guys. I loved it. At that point, my wife and I, we had 4 kids, no family in Redding. And so we moved back to Portland, and we opened up a studio there, and just across the river in Vancouver, and produced John Mark's Mercury and Lightning record and a whole bunch of other records that were, kind of up and coming and independent Christian artists, Circuit Riders, Lindy Conant, and bigger church movements like Influence Music, things like that. I just love making records, and I think here's what's fascinating to me is that recorded music is really young. As a technology, it's like 100-ish or less years old. And so if you think back to like our first recorded music really is the Psalms, and it still like messes with us today. It informs us. It's the blueprint by which worship artists write, but we never got to hear the Psalms the way that David designed it. And then you think about the classical music, of Bach and Beethoven and all these guys, like none of that's recorded. All we have is the sheet music. But we, and it still informs what we do today, But then there's recorded music, and around, the 1950s and 60s, it really began to get disseminated, and it's a wild thing to realize, like, what's going to be the impact 100 years from now, even 1,000 years of art being made, and even like, if you're into the woo-woo stuff like I am, the frequency of song and the frequency of music is like a humming beehive. And it plays worldwide, everywhere, through streaming platforms and everything. It's literally affecting everything right now. And what is that collective hum? What is the fruit of that 100 years, 1,000 years from now, of all of this music being made? And so people ask me, like, well, what's the point? There's so much music being made. Why even make it? And I'm like, yeah, that's why you make it. Because there's so much being made. And we have no idea what's going to, like, be impacting the world 100 years from now. And so I'm fascinated by the art form in that way.
The scope of that comment makes me think you might enjoy a book by this person, Dr. Leah Payne.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, oh gosh, I will definitely send you a copy. Yeah. Because I could tell by the way you made, I'd love to bring us to your Instagram reel that so many people sent to me. I love the way you were making this argument, because it was really basically like a sociological argument about why, in your mind, the music, and I'm excited to hear you expand it a little bit here, because you can only put so much in a reel. But what it was about, first, could you tell us why you decided to make that big pronouncement about Delirious being more influential than Nirvana? Like, what brought you to say, I'm going to make this? I'm gonna put this hot take out here.
So there's a couple of things. Number one, I talked to John Mark McMillan about it during a record that we were making once, and so as I began to make reels, he was like, dude, you got to talk about your take on Delirious, because I think it's like something that's really going to make people want to just consider the impact of that band and worship art and all that. So some of it, admittedly, I'm going to blame him. He was very much like, you got to not just say this to me, but say it out loud.
Wait. Are you telling me there's a 90s Christian band that had more impact on music than Nirvana? In 1992, a great band came around named Nirvana, and they changed everything. The way people dressed, the way bands sounded, everything went from glam, metal, Def Leppard, Winger, to like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden. We were all there for it. Sorry, I was there for it. But something something even more crazy happened just a few years later.
That's blasphemy.
Now, before you come at me guns a-blazing in the comments, let me lay out the case. Imagine you're living in the mid-90s, and in your town...
I remember I was having lunch with a drummer who was a drummer of a pretty famous worship leader, and this would have been like 2015. And he had just gotten back from Abbey Road, and they had done a session at Abbey Road, and it was like a live worship thing at Abbey Road, right? And I was like, man, what was that like to play Abbey Road? Like, I've been there mastering records, but I've never been in Studio 2 and played. And he was like, honestly, I don't know. I feel like I thought it would be different. I thought it would feel different. I feel like maybe just because it's worship music, maybe it's not. I don't know. It just didn't feel the same. He was kind of at a loss for words. He didn't want to put worship down. And I was like, bro, I got a question for you. And it just kind of hit me over this lunch conversation. I said, how many people do you think are playing Killers songs every weekend? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, in the bars, like there's no cover bands anymore. So how many people are even playing like Ronnie's drum parts? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, neither do I. But how many people are playing your drum parts on such and such song that's like super famous? I'm like, I bet there's over 1,000 drummers in the world every weekend that play your parts that you wrote on that song. In my opinion, you might be having more influence on drummers than Ronnie from the Killers. And all of a sudden it was like, that was the moment it just kind of, it shook me really bad. And I don't know, he was stoked, about that. It made him feel good. But I just was like, well, when did this start? When did everything change? Like, how is this possible? And it can be argued even, on the podcast when you guys were talking about this a couple weeks ago, the love song era, or maybe 80s Christian rock. But really the tipping point seemed to be Delirious. It was fun. Like, U2 really informs Delirious sonically, and everybody knows that. But the church in the 80s and 90s was really adverse to U2. Bono cussed too much. They didn't like the cross-dressing on Achtung Baby's cover. They were way too into the AIDS campaign. It was just like church repellent. And so there wasn't like a U2 stamp of approval on changing the sound of worship. It was really Delirious showing people how to, marry, as I said, even with the Violet Burning, a great singable worship melody to a rock and roll sound. And all of a sudden that became the thing. And before you knew it, Delirious was giving churches permission and youth groups and college groups permission to rock in church in a way that they hadn't before.
Yeah, and in a way it's got a longer tail than like the rock music industry, as you say. Like the live music in bars is not really such a thing these days, but it's definitely in so many churches. And yeah, there's probably 2,000 mega churches in the U.S. or that have big bands,
and then worldwide as well. Brazil, Colombia, like all throughout Europe. It's everywhere. It's really and even if that wasn't enough, Delirious still has songs being played, like in churches from 30 years ago. Songs, I Can Sing of Your Love Forever, Did You Feel the Mountains Tremble, Rain Down, Majesty. Like they're still in rotation some of them in the top 500 songs of CCLA charts. So tremendous impact.
So you toured with Delirious, and so what can you tell us about, like, let's give a snapshot of their pocket history.
Delirious started as a worship band at these things called Cutting Edge Youth Nights in Southampton. I think it was kind of accidental that they became a thing, They were really just like some guys that are, interestingly enough, mosely related by marriage. 4 of the 5 guys in Delirious are actually brother-in-laws. So these 4 guys all married sisters, which is incredible. They were all Thatcher girls. And then John Thatcher, 3 guys married sisters. And then one of the boys in the band was a Thatcher. So 4 of them are brother-in-laws. And then Stu G, who's still in the music business today, playing guitar for a ton of people, influential guitar player. He was the guy, kind of the odd man out, not family, but definitely like a really long, like a strong piston in the engine of Delirious' sound. So they're this cutting edge band, and eventually, like every time they hold this cutting edge meeting, they're selling tapes made from the, of the songs that they're playing at the meetings. And their meetings are literally doubling in size, from like a couple hundred kids to 400 kids to 800. They have to change buildings. They max that building out. They move out to a field. They keep doubling till they hit about 10,000 people that are coming out to this like cutting edge youth night. And they realized, like, we got to do this full time. I think at the point they did it full time, they didn't want to associate the name just specific to that youth meeting. So they went from the Cutting Edge Band, which was the worship band at the Cutting Edge meeting to Delirious.
Shout to the north and the south, sing to the east and the west, Jesus is Savior to all, Lord of heaven and earth.
At the same time, not a lot of people know they started one of the most impactful independent music labels called Furious Records. Furious Records had Delirious. Delirious would sign their stuff to Furious, and then Furious would do their licensing to other labels. So they were kind of way ahead of the curve. And then with Furious Records, they started Fierce Distribution, which became arguably the largest worldwide distributor of Christian music while they had Fierce. So, I mean, just kind of a powerful group of guys and really strong business acumen, surrounded by Tony Patato, who was their manager, Jonathan Brown, who was their label head, all of which still continue to this day in the music business, and all really good guys, and I would say integrous guys as well. Delirious had a really strong run. They also impacted the general market music charts on BBC Radio. One of their songs, White Ribbon Day, was kind of a protest day and a celebration of the end of what is White Ribbon Day and the end of the IRA and all the violence and stuff. And that song
like
hit
the Good Friday chords, type thing.
And that song hit top 20 BBC Radio.
For White Ribbon Day, and we pray for peace to flood our hearts again. Only God can save our nation now.
They had a song called Inside Outside in 2004 or 5, hit number 1 in Germany. I mean, and that's like all of number 1. So they were impactful general market and Christian market. In Europe at the time, I don't think there was a very strong Christian market. A lot of the festivals back then were sort of mixed of Christian bands and general market bands. It was just kind of radio. They have different rights and different, I don't believe at that time you could have a Christian music exclusive station. You could have an hour of Christian music on the BBC.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
So
yeah,
just a different, way less subculture, in my opinion, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Delirious, I think they had a strong run until about 2008 or 9 when they decided that they were going to call it quits. Furious and Fierce's catalog was sold or given to Integrity via Kingsway and a bunch of business moves like that. Martin Smith continues to this day doing music, Stu G as well. Various members have other, side projects like Tim Jepp, who is the keyboard player, runs the UK's largest Christian music festival called Big Church Day Out. About 35,000 people there this year. So they're still as men, they're still very important businessmen, in the business of Christian music, and they forged a lot of new concepts, even right down to starting their own label instead of signing to a traditional record deal and running with it. So anyway, at the same time, Delirious, with the cutting edge youth meetings being their background, Martin Smith being the primary songwriter of the band, just a propensity to write great singable melodies. And he was really influenced by Vineyard stuff and Kevin Prosh, and maybe even Violet Burning, all that stuff that was coming out of the Vineyard in the late 80s, early 90s. And so with all of that influence, kind of understanding how to write a great singable song, but he was just young and, wanted to kick the teeth out of the expectations of the sound, and he wanted to rock, and he's just a great front man. I remember him telling me just a few years ago, the problem with worship music today is nobody breaks a sweat anymore. It's all too easy. It's like we had to break a sweat if we were going to get people to join us and sing, So he was just kind of a Bono-inspired sort of front man, very animated, very dramatic, and but at the same time would always lend that towards the corporate experience and not just putting on a good show.
Now, a quick question, and then I'll let Leah ask a substantive question. But did they ever explain to you why they put a 5 instead of an S and a question mark at the end?
I can't speak to that. Okay. I don't know. It's 90s. I don't know. 90s art. Who knows?
It was the 90s.
Rock that doesn't roll.
This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com. This show is supported by Blue Land. You've probably heard that most of us are eating a credit card's worth of plastics every week, but you probably don't know that you're cleaning with microplastics every day. It's time to make the switch to Blue Land. Blue Land is on a mission to make it easy for everyone to make sustainable choices. From cleaning sprays and toilet bowl cleaner to dishwasher and laundry detergent tablets, Blue Land's formulas are 100% microplastic free, made with certified clean ingredients, and free from chlorine, bleach, and harsh chemicals. All Blue Land cleaning products are safe to use around your family, your pets, your plants. Plus, Blue Land was named an EPA Safer Choice Partner of the Year, so they're good for the planet as well. Blue Land is trusted in over 1 million homes by people who love not having to choose between the safe option and what actually gets their home clean. Blue Land has a special offer for listeners. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/prx. Make the switch to Blue Land now by going to blueland.com/prx for 15% off. That's blueland.com/prx to get 15% off.
Actually, the first question I have is, what kind of response have you gotten from making this reel?
I got to tell you, like, I am overwhelmed by how many people shared it. It's 20,000 plus shares and tons of like views. I think it's almost 1 million views just on Instagram, also on TikTok. And it's been overwhelming, and there's been a lot of messages and feedback. Everybody's generally pretty cool. Some people, are snarky in the comments, but I think the overarching thing is, how come it's Delirious and not DC Talk? How come it's Delirious and not Petra or Striper? Bands that arguably sold a lot more records, Yeah.
But no, your argument's stronger for Delirious than for any of those other.
Yeah, and really, and really, it's about the impact on musicians and the environment that musicians largely right now, or especially through like the early 2000s and even 2010 on. They grow up playing in church, and a lot of them creatively outgrow it. I did get a lot of pushback from that. Like, nobody outgrows the church. They left the church behind. I wasn't talking about leaving Jesus. I'm talking about leaving the low creative ceiling that Christian music has. Even nowadays, like I do feel like worship music is more creative than it has been in a lot of ways, but still it's a relatively narrow sound.
Right.
And I just mean, Foster the People, or the Kings of Leon grew up like playing in their dad's revivals. Like there was a grid for guys like that, or even Mumford & Sons. I left them out of the reel because that was too obvious. It was
because they're just basically
Marcus
vineyard
Mumford's
guys.
He's a pastor's kid.
Okay, so
right.
I thought of two counter arguments. I just wanted to run it by you, see what you think. One argument would be, well, it's really U2. Right. So like the kind of original species of this sort of like worshipful stadium rock vibe is like it's secondhand to Delirious. What do you think about that?
I 100% agree with the argument in that they influenced Delirious.
Right.
There would be no Delirious sound without U2.
Without U2.
And even downline, U2 still informs guitar players through the Edges guitar work and all kinds of stuff. I think the thing that I push back on is that in the 80s and 90s especially, the church was very adverse to U2. They were not friendly to the evangelicals. They pushed hard on Reagan. They weren't, Bono said the F word way too much. You couldn't do that as a Christian in the 80s, right?
And even on TV. Too.
Yeah. I knew you would have a good answer for that. And I love it because you're right. A lot of people gave me a hard time for not making U2 more prominent in my book. And I was like, this is a book about contemporary Christian music. Of course, the executives loved U2 and they all went to their concerts, and all the A&R guys did, and all the guys in bands did. But the market did not support U2. So like the Beckys, the Christian bookstore moms, they were not buying U2, they were buying Delirious. Okay, so the other one, and I'm like, oh, you yourself are a product of it, is what if we say that it's like those charismatic churches, a lot of them on the West Coast, that had like skate church and the kinds of churches that supported your churches, the churches of your upbringing. What if we say like, how would you respond that those those are like Jesus People churches, Calvary Chapel churches, Vineyard churches. And it's not really Delirious. It's like those networks of churches. What do you think?
Those networks of churches were definitely among the first to have electric guitars in them, 100%. It used to be, like, I remember in our church being the first guy I knew to play electric guitar as a worship leader, to lead with that instead of an acoustic was like, shock, you know? But I will say Delirious made it consumable. So while they may have like sort of started to break it down, Delirious gave it for the Willow Creek churches, for the Baptist churches, for the larger mainline churches that weren't like white flag dancing, falling on chairs, Toronto blessing, charismatic churches where kind of anything went already anyways. They put it into like a package that was consumable. Verse, chorus, bridge, chorus out, guitar hooks that you could sing, things that just were like in those, even let's say Morning Star or Vineyard churches prior, to Delirious, that just wasn't that musical thesis. It was a little bit more hippie music than it was like a U2 embodied European guitar sound. So.
I knew you'd have a good answer for that. And I'm just having the most fun with this conversation, but I don't want to dominate it. Andrew, do you have any questions?
No. I was going to point out also, like Leah brought up when we talked about this before, that it was their Britishness.
I do think it a little bit. Yeah.
Just having an accent and, so much of this happening, I think evangelicals thought of Europe and England as, this godless, place of secularism. And if they can get 10,000 kids into a field that are like, all singing these praise songs, this is incredible, like we have to get some of that, in our churches. And so then they're like, okay, bring the delay pedal in and use distortion and buy an expensive amp,
Well, and truly, British culture has kind of been that way. That was Beatlemania.
Right.
That was honestly, even Kings of Leon, like I remember they broke in England with their first two records way before they broke in the States. And I remember the Kings guys talking about how their label intentionally brought them over, knowing their music would connect more there. And then the Brits, as a successful British thing, even though the Kings of Leon were like American,
re-import.
They re-import it with a grid of it fashions that way even, right? And we even see that in music to this day, like the West Coast and the East Coast, fashion, music, everything. Those are places of import. They import culture, they import
that's right.
fashion, all of that stuff. And then it slowly leaks to the Midwest. And I think that we definitely, them being British made it like, oh, really? It's cool over there? Absolutely. And, history repeating itself like with the Beatles even,
I love that you brought up Kings of Leon. So I was a student at Vanderbilt Divinity School years ago, and I grew up in one of those West Coast hippie, like flag waving. My dad was a Foursquare pastor in the Portland area. And so that was not the dominant culture at Vanderbilt Divinity School. It's very respectable, mainline. And so the Pentecostal people would kind of find each other. And I remember, because it was in Nashville, I met this one guy, his name was Marcus Tremmel. Shout out to Marcus. And Marcus was like, he's like, I have these friends. I just was managing a tour for them. I think they're going to be really big. And of course, everyone in Nashville has a friend who's going to be really big. I was like, who is it? And he was like, he was a United Pentecostal. I think he was United Pentecostal, Oneness Pentecostal guy. And he's like, they were like pastors' kids, and it was Kings of Leon. And he was totally right about that. They were huge. Yeah. But I remember kind of being a little eye roll. Or just like, oh, sure, everyone has a friend who's going to be huge. And they were amazing. So
I remember one time, this would have been 2004. They were playing all the songs from their second record before they were flying to LA to work with Ethan Johns on it. And it was at 12th and Porter in Nashville. I was losing my mind. They were like so good. I was like yelling like a girl at a Beatles show the whole time. I was literally like, who is Jet? Who is Jet next to the Kings of Leon?
Well,
and,
okay, his voice to me is Russ Taff. Like, it's like that, like very woodsy, like backwoodsy Pentecostal sound. Like it's so I can't get enough of it.
And they're also really influenced by Kevin Prosh. Like they would hang out with Prosh back in the day. They were way into the Black Peppercorns. Black Peppercorns was Prosh's band. Ethan Johns, who produced the first two maybe even three Kings of Leon records, produced the black peppercorn stuff for Kevin Prosh. Like, it's all just this big kind of Southern swirl. It's kind of cool.
I found myself out of my depth in this discussion.
I'm sorry.
I don't know a lot of these names. So.
It's usually the other way around. Andrew can just like he's got bands at the ready that you would not believe. But when it comes to the charismatic-y worship stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, let's cook. But anyhow.
100%.
Do you want to, well, we could go two directions right now. We could either get deeper into the bands that were influenced by Delirious that you list off very rapid fire.
Yeah, that was cool.
And your real.
Katy Perry, Justin Bieber, Foster the People, Civil Wars, Johnny Swim, Paramore, The Fray, Lifehouse, Switchfoot, Mute Math, Chris Stapleton, Carrie Underwood, Need to Breathe, Morgan Wallen, Anne Berlin, Norma Jean, Under Oath, even overseas pop like Natasha Bedingfield, or Australian rock like Gang of Youths. It's even rumored that Chris Martin from Coldplay was a worship team kid.
Or we could look at Nirvana's impact and, look at the other side of the coin. So choose your own adventure, you guys. Like, which one do we want to go down?
Let's start with Nirvana. Nirvana, I was around for it.
Yeah.
I was in high school still when Nevermind dropped. I had there's a college station in Astoria, Oregon called KMUN that I had a college radio show on. So I was playing Bleach, playing all that stuff. I was super into it. It was great. It was a great time, and really maybe the last great era of rock and roll as we know it, in my opinion. And it was really special. At the time, you had a form of rock and roll that was really like Stryper would more closely embody it. In the Christian side, it was spandex, it was glam, it was hair. Yeah. Sort of like T-Rex glam from the 70s gone wild. Sunset Strip in LA was probably the place where most music was being influenced from when it came to rock and roll. Guns N' Roses, Poison, and Guns N' Roses was kind of like a dirtier, less feminine makeup, or as we know it, androgynous look or whatever. But really, all of a sudden, 120 Minutes starts showing on MTV back when MTV still played music, and you had the Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, all that stuff. But Nirvana was the one that actually kicked it out through their record Nevermind. And when it came out, it was a David Geffen record company record. It was massive, just a massive. Smells Like Teen Spirit changed the game. You either loved it or you hated it. Anybody who was part of the Sunset Strip thing thought, these guys don't even dress up in stage clothes. What's their problem? They're wearing flannels. They're wearing jeans, and all of us kids loved it. It was amazing. The downline from that was that everybody started getting dropped by their labels if they weren't anything like that. And then everybody realized that was the new hotness, and they started forming bands or signing bands that were already kind of in Nirvana's wake in the Seattle and Portland scene. And then California bands like Everclear started moving to Portland to become a Portland band so they could get a deal. And it just changed the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
And then phase two was Chicago. They came and did the signing spree in Chicago and got Urge Overkill and Liz Phair and Smashing Pumpkins.
That's right.
All of that stuff.
And Butch Vig, who had produced the Pumpkin stuff. Billy Corgan to this day swears that Vig ripped off the Pumpkins to produce the Nirvana Nevermind record. Oh, sure. Which is a great musical argument. But
well, and then on their second album, they had Steve Albini from Chicago, record in Minnesota. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about Nirvana's. Okay, so I'm trying to build up a case for Nirvana beyond the music, because I think your strongest case for Delirious is like the structural influence that they have over, like in megachurch, stadium rock style worship, which has become like the dominant form in all evangelical churches, I think it's safe to say. And then also many mainline and even in Catholic spaces where they're like importing stuff that has been directly influenced by Delirious, and in the process influencing like generations of music makers. It's a sweeping argument and I really like it. So I'm trying to like bolster the Nirvana case, because I'm from a small logging community outside the Portland area, raised in the 90s. And I remember seeing like young people from in the case of Kurt Cobain, Aberdeen, another like logging community outside of Pacific Northwestern city. Like the guys, they were dressed like my dad, like my dad was a Forest Service employee. And they were like, all of a sudden their culture, like that working class culture was everywhere. Like people all over the world were dressing like them, were like acting, kind of the disaffected 90s, whatever. And so I'm like, I'm trying to bolster the case of their influence beyond music. Like I'm seeing teens everywhere wearing Nirvana t-shirts right now.
To this day.
Yeah. Do they even know who Kurt Cobain, do they know they're wearing a band t-shirt? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, so I'm sort of like, can we argue that their influence is beyond even music, is like an aesthetic that lives on? I'm trying to make a really strong case.
Yeah, I might, if we bifurcated this, and we said Nirvana may have had a bigger and broader influence, but not musical, but to this day, as far as, because I think we also have to take into account the rise of non-instrument based music,
right?
Like electronic and hip hop and things that don't require guitars, bass, and drums, and how much more popular that music is now than it was when Nirvana started or when the Delirious started. And the music that still gets played, though, now the percentage of it way more happens in churches than it did back in those days. So it's kind of like the downward spiral of secular music in public contributes to Delirious having a larger impact.
Oh, that's a good argument. Okay, I like it.
So. I would say Nirvana's impact was much more cultural even than musical. I mean, it was a massive musical impact. This is not to diminish their musical impact. It was incredible. Their musical impact was almost unprecedented at that point, right? Except for the Beatles, probably. However, they also affected fashion. They affected television programming. I would say they affected the color scheme of the 90s, because suddenly, you went from like 80s color, pop, pink, Corvettes, sort of like whatever you see like with Reaganomics and color, to sepia tones and monochromatic and T-Max film. And, if you just think about the stylized lines and obviously then fashion, the way people dressed went from glam and glitz to like grunge all the way. And that definitely had a lot of different things that dovetailed out of it, from, revisiting revisiting like late 70s punk and its look, because I think grunge at the point at which grunge happened, like anti-establishment fashion became a thing, and there was almost like no set look anymore. You could kind of just look like anything you wanted to, from Sinead O'Connor to Courtney Love. Those would be two perfectly legit, looks for a music artist, right? And those are very different looks. So yeah, just thinking of like Nirvana's impact on fashion, on the color tone, on the conversation, the things people were allowed to talk about,
the irony in a way, like the way that they brought in kind of a anti-corporate irony into the mainstream, to pose on the cover of Rolling Stone with a shirt that says corporate magazines still suck.
I know.
That to do that is like not something that's a new contribution, I feel like. Or at least it's
you could tie like
in a way.
AOC to that, her Tax the Rich or whatever that expensive dress is.
Yeah, exactly. Wearing that to the Met Gala.
Yeah. Did you bring up? I apologize because the bands came so fast and furious, and I forgot to listen to it again. Did you bring up the Jonas Brothers in your?
No, never did, and that's another great example.
Yeah, I was thinking about them. I was like, because one of the things that I tried to argue in the book was that people like Britney Spears and Jessica Simpson, they are essentially Christian artists in their own kind of way. I mean, they were talking about being Baptist. Jessica Simpson was a Baptist daughter or Baptist pastor's daughter. They wore purity rings. The Jonas Brothers were wearing purity rings. So like the aims of CCM went mainstream through this like little gaggle of Disney artists, including Selena Gomez and all that. Anyway, and so I was thinking about the Jonas Brothers. I was like, oh, I would almost put them in, because they were like Pentecostal kids who, by the way, I still really want to have Joe Jonas cast as Carmen in the biopic. This is something you've heard it here.
We have to keep putting it out in the world.
I'm trying to manifest it, okay? But because they're from New Jersey, right? It's perfect. But anyway, I was like, I think you could argue that maybe even Delirious is kind of seeping in those, like the very, very pop artists, not just the kind of the band type guys. I don't know.
And Katy Perry.
Yes.
And others.
Oh, yeah.
Justin Bieber grew up playing drums in a Vineyard Church, I believe, in Canada, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
I mean, there's just a lot. I mean, there was almost too many to mention. So I was trying to like make it a swath of a bunch of different genres, not just like European sounding rock, but pop, country, and
Yeah, but every one of those could be an episode of this podcast.
I know. Yeah, you got to come back. We got to do this again. Yeah.
That's why I keep telling people, I'm like, as soon as you start looking, every rock you turn over, there's like another person or like some other tendril that you could explore that this world has influenced. You know?
Very, very true.
Rock that doesn't roll.
Hey, Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners. We just want to give you an update on our Patreon support. We have been very heartened to see new people signing up almost every week to help bring this podcast to you. And we could not appreciate it more.
Yeah. So for those of you who may or may not know, this is a work of love. This is a project that comes from the heart. And so we rely on funds from dedicated listeners like you all. Thank you so much to the people who've already decided to give. It's actually, I don't know, it warms my heart. I don't know how you feel about it. Andrew, you were raised Methodist. Is your heart strangely warmed by...
Yeah, just call me John Wesley over here. Yeah. No, it is the thing that, is required to make the show. We are still not really paying ourselves a fair wage, but we are offsetting some of the lost potential earning time that we put into this podcast. Yeah. So if you do want the show to continue existing, we do need listeners to support us. And, if that's not financially, you can tell people about us. You could share us on social media, do all other things. But we would love this to be something we can dedicate a lot of time to. But, we have to provide for our families, and we do not each have trust funds. I don't have a trust fund. You don't have a trust fund, do you, Leah?
Okay.
Just
no,
checking. Yeah,
sad to say. Yeah.
So, yeah, we appreciate all the support.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Here's another bugaboo thing that I have about Delirious. I want to know what day and what location Chris Martin went to see them. Like, what show was it? And was it multiple shows? Did he ever meet them? Did you get any insight into this when you were on tour with Delirious?
Yeah. Okay. So the verifiable thing that I can tell you is that Chris Martin went to some sort of religious school in Exeter and was a part of that worship band that was in the school. Okay. That's the verifiable thing. I have a friend who's in a band, a Canadian band, indie band, who grew up in Britain. He's a British citizen, and I produced their record. And he would talk about how Chris Martin lived across the street from his grandmother and knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were church attenders because they all went to the same church with his grandma. But as far as his worship team experience, the only real thing that's verifiable is the Exeter thing. I've read other things that are like not, corroborated, and I just want to be careful to not say things that aren't true.
That's good. Very responsible.
But our guest a couple episodes ago, David Gate, he was a part of the Soul Survivor worship world in England, and he said he knows for a fact that Chris Martin attended a Delirious shows. He was a vicar's kid, he said.
Yeah, and
this is all attributed to him.
That's true. And Martin, I remember I've produced one record for Martin Smith called Iron Lung back in the day. We sort of spoke about this, and Martin had said that he remembered seeing Chris, and just he's like, I don't know, there's just people that jump out and you're like, that kid's going to be something. And it would have been probably when Chris was 13, 14, 15 in in that age range or whatever. So,
but there's no moment that they remember handing him a guitar pick, or
nothing like that,
letting him come up on stage, or
nothing that'd be cool if it was true.
No passing the torch.
No,
that would be cool.
Yeah, cool. But even Chris Martin has made mention of his time in church in very mainstream articles, and how there's a spiritual sound and people singing together that he experienced in church, that he wanted to bring that into the Coldplay experience. He's been pretty candid about that, and yeah, gosh, it goes before Delirious too. Truly, Elvis grew up singing in churches, a lot of gospel artists, a ton of stuff, But I just think the Delirious effect, as I would call it, the Delirious effect is the fact that for whatever reason, they did it in such a way that gave churches everywhere a grid for music sounding like that in church. And all of a sudden, over the course of maybe 5 short years, you had every church adopting a youth group band that sounded Delirious-esque or Sonic Flood-esque, which was downstream from Delirious,
Right.
You had everybody, after Delirious popped off the way they did, everybody started. It was almost like we lost Christian entertainment. There was no more Christian entertainment. It all transitioned into some variation of congregational worship as a CCM, music industry, right?
Yeah.
So,
now, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your own experience in the music industry that during your time in rock and roll worship circus, you made no money, right? It was not financially lucrative.
No.
But at some point, the worship world did get there, to be financially lucrative. So when did that switch happen, as far as you can tell? I mean, I'm not asking for your bank statement.
No.
But,
well, I think that a really cool, I don't know. I have a lot of conflicting feelings about this. So I feel that because of the United States copyright laws, public performances of songs happening, whether it's in a bar or whether it's in an amphitheater or whether it's in a church auditorium, there is a royalty rate that gets paid when somebody does your song, because the song is essentially IP. Mm-hmm. So, really the way that a lot of writers of worship songs are getting paid is just from public performance of the song. So if you have a song that gets played in a lot of churches, that's really a lot of revenue that gets made from that public performance worldwide. And there's a company called CCLI that basically, tracks all those royalties and collects them and pays the writers. And I'm thankful that they do, because it's allowed people to give their life to songwriting for the church. I think that it can also be tricky, because I've met a lot of writers that they get their first successful song and they can actually afford a mortgage now, and what became a very pure expression now becomes a lot of pressure, just to write another song that can sustain the mortgage.
Right.
I'll never forget, I don't think you would mind me saying this, but when we were making Mercury and Lightning, John Mark McMillan talking about How He Loves was his breakout song, and the revenue from that actually allowed him to pay a band and to tour.
Yeah.
And how, it was scary as that revenue begins to wane, and the pressure that comes to feel like I have to write another song that resonates with the church that way. But that was never how He Loves was written.
Right.
And how King of My Heart began to take off, which was another one of him and Sarah's songs. And that really took the pressure off of him as a writer on the Mercury and Lightning record, where he could really take a look inside at the struggle of his faith. And, I don't think he would have ever mailed a song in just to try to get a CCLI hit. That's just not who he is. But it was cool to just have him acknowledge the pressure's off me. I really have to wrestle with this. And, he almost pulled the plug on that record. I remember him saying, I don't want to make this record. I have to figure out what I believe. And I said, or we could make a record while you figure out what you believe. I was so into it, because I don't know. To me, there's nothing more moving to me. And I believe there's nothing more moving even to God than an honest song, especially of someone who's really asking sincere questions. It's part of the blueprint of the Psalms. And so I think it's something we're required to do as Christian writers. So as far as the revenue that goes, though, in the 90s and in the 2000s, I don't think there was quite as much revenue, because songs were not really online quite as much. There was not as much YouTube shorts and streamed Christian, services and things like that. With web streaming, those CCLI rates got bigger, because now the song's not only being played, you're also getting YouTube revenue from it. You're getting the live performance revenue from it. That's, in the venue, but also then online. So yeah, it's really become, the worship circus in our old band, we were basically in a van, 200 days, 200 shows a year. I think our largest honorarium might have been like $5,000, and that would have been on a fly date to Creation Festival East. That took all the $5,000 to get there,
Right.
And but I don't have any complaints about that. I was just I was saying I picked up record producing as well to really I would produce 3 or 4 records in the winter, and that would give me enough money to like pay the bills while I was on tour losing money.
I had to ask because oftentimes we zoom out and we say, all right, that's the inflection point and we say it's because CD sales might have fallen off. It's one theory people posit is like CD sales fall off. So then the Christian market is like, well, worship music, is another thing we could do, since people aren't buying CDs now. But I guess it wasn't immediately profitable. But the other thing I wanted to point out though is that, bands might be covering the Rolling Stones or something, but if they're in just a bar, like some band touring, they're much less likely, I would imagine, to keep good records and pay the licensing for whatever song, because you play it on a stage and nobody knows that you did it. And who's going to, but at church, you're supposed to be honest and you're going to have records and admins and you're actually going to pay that licensing more consistently. So it's part of the you got to be good and be a church, to pay your licensing and stay legal.
And very easily traceable through Song Select and ProPresenter, or not ProPresenter, sorry, Planning Center. Because all of that,
the platform.
Your scheduling platform has the order of service and all this. You pull that song in, and the weekend goes by, and I'm pretty sure that's automatically reported now. I mean, it's none of that stuff was that way back then.
So it's not just a pastor making a PowerPoint, drag and drop or whatever.
Well, I remember because CCLI is from Gresham, Oregon. And I remember my dad dutifully, because he was not the music pastor, but he was a pastor of a small church. And I remember my dad dutifully reporting but this was back when we were doing slides.
It's like,
yeah. So, I think it's true. Those charismatic churches are super innovative when it comes to technology. And so I think you don't even have to give any kind of nefarious, you don't have to attribute nefarious reasons behind the industry shifting. It's just that there's a reliable income source, whereas recorded music isn't, to the same degree. And so it's in some ways you could just argue that it's as simple as that's all there's left. In the business, because the CCLI made it possible for churches to become really important revenue sources. And so now, people aren't really buying records except for when they buy a Taylor Swift record or something, they don't buy them as much.
And when they buy that, they buy 28 versions of it. So
I mean, artists like that so just dominate what's left of the market. But anyway, I think I'll be really fascinated to see where all of that goes, how, what will be next in the kind of the church sphere. What do you think? Who's the Delirious now? Because that's,
I don't know. I can't say that anybody is. What I think typically happens in music trends is whatever's happening underground sort of rises to the surface, right? So we can see the pushback on disco being mainstream was the Sex Pistols and punk rock. The pushback to, 80s, the pushback to that was the 80s sequenced music of pop music. And then you have the pushback to that being the glam metal, the pushback to that being the grunge. It's always kind of the underground that pops out. Christian music right now is very monotone as far as the mainstream goes. It's it is one color of, and I'm not talking race, I'm talking of music, really. It's there's a sheen in the sound, and it's kind of monotone. But happening in the underground right now is a return to simplicity. It's a return to almost folk roots and the early days of simple choruses, less complex, no big building, epic explosions, and a lot more sacred and simple. And I can see a world where we return to that a lot. I think people do tend to, whether they know it or not, get exhausted when they hear the same thing over and over and over again, and they start to look for something new. And that's not to say that, the big explosions of, the massive artists, their sonic explosions, I mean, aren't good. I just mean not everything should be that. But when it comes to revenue among musicians and the churches and stuff, I don't know how this would ever work. But I've always believed that the way that the record industry pays out, the way that music royalties work, the way all these things work is really kind of, it's all been influenced by the early origins of record sales in the 50s and 60s, which were kind of based upon physical product, based upon, you put out a record and 80% of your sales come within that first couple months, and then it's 20% long tail revenue. It's interesting because if something hits now, it's going to be streamed for a long time, and potentially you could make more money in long tail revenue than ever before. That's interesting to me. But I also wonder sometimes if musicians are kind of like, to put it in like old school, like Old Testament terms, if the like the Levitical community of Christian music has just not been supported by the church the way it was supposed to. And so the only way that we've known to make a living is in the public square. When in reality, the public square is like the worst place for true art and the worst place for like high moral ground, and the worst place for like, humility. And so I think about like, monastic songs and things that would have been like old and sacred and Catholic and Anglican styles and things like that. And I just go, I wonder if there's a day when like what would happen if, a church was to say, all of our musicians, there's like these 10 core musicians, and all of them are employed by the church to literally be on staff. They have a salary, and they are our janitors, they're our groundskeepers, they are our counselors, and they're our musicians. And their job is to minister to our church and to minister to the Lord. That's their job. They don't need to worry about a living. They don't have to worry about having a big hit in order to pay a mortgage because their lives are sustained. And their job is just to move the Lord. What would happen like in a community? What's the long-term fruit of that sort of like monastic or Levitical approach? And I think there's a world where all of the ambition and all of the need for CCLI revenue to exist and all that stuff for the worship community is really getting exhausting. And we all kind of, we'll hit writing rooms, because I'm with all the main guys and we'll talk about, man, it's hard. Like we're in the writing room, like, 2, 3, 4 times a week. How do you keep it fresh? How do you write about that, that thing with the Lord when you haven't had an encounter that isn't rooted in a writing room and have the song feel good, but then there's others, like I'm watching in small communities where they're serving their community. There's a community out here in East Tennessee of guys that have like a drug recovery place and a prison recovery place and a foster home that has like 60 kids that are way too hard for foster cares, the foster care system. So they're in like a children's home. And then they write songs out of that. It's the testimonies of these drug addicts and the testimonies of these kids. And all of them, they don't care to actually make money from their music. Not because making money is bad, but they just don't need it to survive. So like if a song goes big, it's like, that's okay, great. But they're like living kind of, it's not monastic, so to speak, but they've given their lives to the poor, to the prison systems. Like some of the guys in this are like chaplains of like 5 jails, and they're just doing really cool like work with the poor and with the orphans and with the prisoners. And then all their songs come out of that. And there's a different weight on it because it doesn't feel like it's written to be sung by all the churches. It feels like it's inherent to that local community. And I don't know. I would love, guys, I would love to see a turn where the church is like, you know what? No longer shall Babylon, the business, be what cares for our musicians. We're going to do it in-house now. That could get weird, maybe. I don't know. There's a whole lot of red flags that I also see, like what about IP and copyright and publishing and all that stuff. But the heart of it, maybe I'm just idealistic, kind of Leninistic in that way, imagine all the people,
Well, what's the just because I've never really delved deep into the worship music industry, but like what would the turnaround time be from writing and finishing a song and adding it to CCLI for churches to be able to access? Like,
that's a good question.
What would the turnaround time be? Would it be like, what would the shortest possible time be? Like if you did it could it be like 2 weeks after you've written the song or something?
Yeah, anymore it's fast because, everything is very automated and especially if you're in a bigger system and, your Elevation, Bethel, anything that has an in-house publishing team built in already. But even for the smaller churches, even if they just knew how to do it, recording is as long as recording takes, so that could happen on a weekend. You could choose not to.
There's got to be a recording for people to hear it, though, right?
Yeah, that's the platform by which the song gets discovered, right? So whether it's put onto a Spotify platform or just a YouTube clip, either way. But yeah, that's as fast as that takes. You take as long as you want to on it once the song's written. But yeah, it's really it's less than a week. You can have that thing registered and copyright and all the things,
Well, because as you were talking, I was imagining a whole different schema. Do you know Jesse Wells?
Yeah,
you know that, singer?
Yeah, so he's great.
I was imagining like him as a example of church music. That's like the songs that he's writing about the headlines today, like being available. They're not really like for corporate singing or anything, but they're speaking to like yesterday. They're speaking to exactly what's happening right now. In a way that like, I'm receiving it through Babylon's tools, which is Instagram,
Right.
I'm curious about having like a, town troubadour that's like, and you're part of your church, writing songs about what happened last week or something, and then you sing it.
Great art was always commissioned before too. That was because there was no money in painting per se as a, replicate and sell. At that time, they were commissioned artists,
But yeah, I was just thinking of too, like the church in Chicago that I attend most weeks, St. James Cathedral. They're celebrating their 150th anniversary, right? So it's all Episcopal choral music and stuff. Yeah. But one of the items on this timeline they put up in the lobby is this guy Leo Sowerby, who is the organist and choir master, who was composing all kinds of church music while on staff at this cathedral. He won the Pulitzer Prize for music while he was doing all that. So he's doing what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That was the kind of model, but to do that as a band or something would be kind of new, I guess. But
yeah, I don't know how it could work. I just know that I think I've always just kind of wondered. It's in the Bible, it's like a Nehemiah 13 principle where I saw the great evil that the king had done, and the Levites and the singers were on the farms to and they had forgotten the ministry of the Lord. So I called the Levites and singers from their farms to tend to the ministry of the Lord again. So they almost like build the altar of worship before they start to reconstruct the wall, and the blessing returns. So it's like the scriptural sort of, example of like, if we'll tend to the Lord's heart, and then, again, what does it take to move people towards God, or what does it take to move God towards people? Like those things are just interesting to me.
I know we don't have all day for this, but one thought, I was talking with, they chose not to go on the record for this comment, but I was talking with a pretty well-known writer from the earlier days of the worship movement. And he had observed that the Asbury revival was happening, if you remember, or they called it an outpouring, that it was, his observations were really fascinating because like a lot of people, he was watching it live stream, and he said, what was interesting about that is that they weren't using projected screen stuff. And he was like, they didn't have to report any of that like to CCLI because everyone was singing from memory. They were doing a lot of hymns and stuff. And he was like, that to me stood out as the radical thing about it because it was outside of the marketplace. Like I get, and I'm not saying that we need to undo CCLI because I can totally see how it funds like the lives of musicians, but maybe raising an awareness about the market's role in like creating the music of the church and how important that is in terms of shaping like people's experience of spirituality generally and Christianity more specifically. I think a lot of regular people just don't know about the business end of it. Like they're just not aware of how much money, how few people it goes to, the money, and all that. So anyway, I appreciate your comments because I think there's just a lot of people just don't know. Like they are completely unaware of how all that works.
And hear me, I'm actually, like you just said, I'm really thankful for CCLI. I'm thankful that someone is collecting for the writers of the church, because it has allowed the livelihoods of a lot of great writers to exist that wouldn't have otherwise. But the downside of that is that there, a lot of times it can corrupt your writing. And I'm not saying everybody out there is corrupted. I'm just saying all of us have to fight this like fear of not landing a song because of revenue. And maybe that's just the nature of commerce and business. I just am not sure that worship and the ministry of the Lord and all that stuff was ever meant to go within that fold, you know? And so, you know, maybe there's a better way that will emerge over the next 100 years that could be really cool. And I've always just thought maybe it's the church just like being like, you know, when it comes to, you know, the arts and church musicians and writers, we're going to step in and take the place of the system.
You know? I'm a historian and I'm not a theologian, but because I've written about the Christian music industry, people have pushed me for like, what's the theological takeaway? And the only one I can come up with is that you can't serve two masters. You can't serve both God and money. And that's the kind of the lesson over and over and over again, is people who think that they can use the marketplace for like specific Christian ends. And then they're always surprised that they get upended by the marketplace. Like another idea sells better, or this one doesn't sell as well. And I think that's the very uncomfortable position a lot of folks at least would tell me off the record that they found themselves in, was that they couldn't really reconcile like the fullness of their experience of Christianity with like the American marketplace. It just was always an uncomfortable relationship.
Yeah. Capitalism is its own religion, you know, I mean.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now, Gabriel, we'll go into our second hour, in which we'll ask you all about all the people who performed at the Charlie Kirk Memorial. So, I'm sure that'll be very comfortable.
Oh yeah.
There could be some reels coming out on that. You never know.
Oh, hey.
Okay. We'll stay tuned for that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. I think we've settled it. We can bifurcate the influence and give both bands some credit, you know, but I think as far as like, live music happening today, Delirious has a connection to a higher percentage of it than Nirvana, I would say.
Yes.
I think we've proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yes,
I think so.
100%.
Take it to court.
All right. Jury's out.
So we all know everyone should follow you on Instagram. Where else should people look for your work if they want to, you know,
oh man,
with you?
I have a website, GabrielWilson.com, and I would just like go check out the artists that I work with, not because I've worked with them, but because I think supporting independent music is really important, and I love working with independent artists. Like John Mark McMillan, I know he's a bigger name, but he is an independent artist. And it's just great to support the indies. Cageless Birds just put out a new record that's, again, an independent record. I don't know. I love making music, and I love the artists that I work with. They're really good people, and I think they're just doing great work. So check them out.
Yeah. Now, John Mark McMillan, I thought I saw, was this his last tour, or is he still making music?
Yeah.
Not touring?
Well, I think he'll always write music and make music. But yeah, I think he, you know, the touring economics are a lot different now, and he talked about that publicly, and he has some great posts on that if you want to go back, you know, a few weeks on that. But he's always going to be an artist. He's actually looking into writing books. He may have already started books. I don't know. I can neither confirm nor deny. But John Mark McMillan, the author, I think is something that I'd really look forward to. He's a really wise man, and he has always put that wisdom forth in lyrics. And I think a longer format's going to be pretty cool to hear and to read. So.
Well, thank you so much, Gabriel, for coming on. This has been really fun. I know we could talk for hours, so thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I've loved it. I've loved hanging out with you guys. It's been great. And
thank you so much.
It's been awesome, guys. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been amazing.
Of course. Thanks for listening. You can also find us on Substack and Instagram by searching Rock That Doesn't Roll.
And of course, you should give us a rating and review on whatever podcast app you're using to listen right now. Rock That Doesn't Roll is an independent production supported by you, our listeners, and distributed by PRX.
Our original score is by Jim Cooper of Infomercial USA.
I'm Leah Payne, and the show's producer and co-host is the one and only Andrew Gill.
Remember, rock all you want, but watch it if you start to roll. Thanks so much for listening to this entire episode all the way to the end. Give yourself a pat on the back. And if you enjoy the show this much, consider becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/RTDR. Thanks so much.